Welcome to Redeeming Missions, a podcast from Every Home for Christ about the complexity of Christian missions and evangelism in our time. We host conversations that will challenge us through unique global perspectives and honest stories. Redeeming Missions is a podcast for ministry leaders, passionate evangelists, and the rest of us who might be a little bit more cautious or even disenchanted with the topic. Together, we're on a journey to find the heart of what it means to carry Christ to our world. I'm your host, Tanner Peak, and I'm so glad you're joining me today. Hey there, guys. I am just so excited that you get to listen into this conversation with a good friend of mine. His name is Tim Hurd. He comes from a thriving community, a thriving church in Birmingham, Alabama. And one of the things I love about this conversation is it's about ministering to people. It's a conversation about how do we really impact the people around us. And that conversation can be really complex. But one thing I love about Tim is he takes something that is really complex and makes it simple. And so I think you're going to enjoy this conversation. It's one of my favorite podcasts, actually, that we've recorded. And so I'm glad you can listen in.
Redeeming Missions is brought to you by Every Home for Christ, a global network of local catalysts, inspiring and empowering the church to carry Christ to everyone, everywhere, in every generation. We have teams in over 155 nations, partnering with local churches and believers to make sure no one gets left behind or overlooked, because the good news of the gospel is for every person on earth. We're not just doing this for the numbers. We're here for the body of Christ worldwide, and that includes you. Every single believer is uniquely called to carry Christ to our worlds, and it's going to take all of us. Find out more and join us today at everyhome.org.
Welcome to this episode of Redeeming Missions. I'm over the moon excited to have sitting with me a friend, Tim Hurd. He's coming from Birmingham, Alabama. I'm excited to just have a casual conversation about missions, what it means, global missions. I think Tim is always really interesting to me. He has a vantage point that I think is really unique. I think we'll talk a little bit about where he's coming from, but I'm happy to have you in the actual studio with me, Tim. That's a big deal.
So excited. It's super helpful to be face to face when you're talking to somebody about anything, but especially stuff we love to do.
It's true. Yeah. I've played a couple of rounds with you, golf with you, and every time, I lament how bad I am at golf.
I'm worse. I am worse. Yeah.
But I love it. We always end up finding our way to, I think, some kind of always inspired missional conversation. So we're going to start out the way that we start out every one of these podcasts. Yeah. It's truly, I'm not just saying this, it's truly my favorite part of sitting down and just getting to hear our guest's story, a little bit about how you got to where you're at. You could start from your childhood. I don't really care whatever feels right to you. But I think imagining our listeners don't know Tim Hurd, and you're gonna let them know or help them understand a little bit what makes you tick and who you are.
Yeah, for sure. Well, hey, it's an honor to be here with you. We've got to know each other probably 4 years ago.
Yeah,
you guys came to town and then we've played some golf and we hung out, and I always appreciate just the ideation that we have. We're both kind of in this space. So hey, I'd love to just, if I could go back and just tell my story. I tell people I grew up Methodist Baptist. So nice. I was Methodist until it went to the Methodist church until my dad passed away when I was 10, and then we moved to the Baptist church, which my mom had always grown up in.
Which those are really different. Those are very different traditions.
They're very different. And at first, I'm sitting in the church and I really didn't know how to grasp it. But then we were a very evangelistic church. We were very missions oriented, which played right back into where I sit now. And so I was on the mission field as a high school student every summer for a minimum of 2 weeks. Brazil, I'll never forget, Brazil was the first place I went. And then inner city in the U.S., and then out on the Navajo reservation in Arizona. So all that, missions was in me at an early age, whether I knew it or not, which was super fun. So anyway, I go through life. I go to college, and I kind of lived the college church experience, which I think a lot of people try to do both, and it's hard.
And you grew up this whole time in Alabama, right?
Whole time in Alabama,
Okay.
which was interesting, that I ended up in Alabama because I never thought I would stay in Alabama. I got recruited to play sports, ended up not playing sports in college, so go to college, just do the whole thing. Get out, I finish up, and I'm working in a bicycle shop, waiting to get into grad school, and realizing that working in the retail was way better and more lucrative at that point than going to grad school. So I just kept doing it. Ended up meeting my wife. Yeah.
I didn't know that part of your story. So I knew there's part of your story that ends up with a bike shop, but I didn't know you started out just in the retail side of it.
Yeah. I'd always been in retail my whole life, just done sporting goods, anything. And anyway, I ended up on the retail side, which was super fun. I meet my wife in the shop that I worked for, and we get married, and we realize we're both believers, but not really following the Lord and the way we know it now. And we're kind of finding churches. So we're going to the Lutheran church, we're going to the Episcopal church, we're going back to the Baptist church. I mean, we tried them all. I'm like, man, this is hard. And finally, I'm in, and by this time I'd opened my own shop, and this lady comes in. She is fired up about church. I'm like, I'm talking fired up, and you just go, man, we need to go try this church. And it was literally, less than 5 minutes from our house, meeting at a high school. And we just go one day, and I get there, and I'm not used to the worship. This is 20 years ago. And I don't know what to do with the hands and all this stuff. And my wife is loving the music. And then, my pastor, who I just honor, all the time I go anywhere, he's just bringing a relevant word that I can understand and use. So we just keep coming. And we keep coming.
And at this point, you're married?
Yeah, we're married. We don't have any kids, and we just start coming to church, and I'm getting so much out of it. Just doing all, wow, how does this work? And then I really just find out, okay, this is what following Jesus is about, and we kind of recommit our lives to doing that. Church is growing. My business is growing. Now I've got another business. Now I've got 2 kids, and I've got a third business in the works.
Wait, so I knew about biking business, you had like a cycling shop, which is like my dream. It's like my dream job is to have a site. My wife knows that. It's like my dream job.
I can help you.
Yeah, right.
I'm not going to work at it, but I can help you.
This is between me and you and the podcast. Yeah, don't tell my wife about that.
Yeah. Well, so out of the podcast, or not out of the podcast, sorry, out of the bike shop, I owned a team.
Yeah.
That raced for my shop.
Yes.
On the team was an Egyptian guy who was Canadian. Anyway, long story short, he comes to me one day and he says, the coffee in this town is terrible. And I'm like, okay, tell me about that. I just know Starbucks and this other local shop that was in our town. And he's like, let's do this. He and I buy this coffee roaster. I'm sure people see them. They're this big. We start just roasting coffee, and he's like, this is what coffee supposed to taste like. And I'm like, man, this is amazing. Then people go, hey, can we buy that? And I'm like, yeah, sure, let's do that. So we start selling, coffee. And next thing you know, the demand is huge. People are so we go buy this gigantic 40-kilo roaster from Germany and move it to Birmingham.
I did not know this part of your story.
Yeah.
You're having like an awakening with the Lord at church.
Yeah.
And in coffee at the same time.
And so I'm like, wow, this is awesome. So now I'm running the bike shop. I'm running the coffee thing. I was coaching athletes. That was what my degree was in. And we're just going at it. I'm just, man, this is awesome. My wife was in corporate America, and her career was, on a great path. And then one day, we look up, and all the businesses are going the right direction. Everything's up. And I realized I need to grow the bike shop, but I didn't want to grow it the way it had. I wanted to do a different path. And then my business partner and I weren't seeing that eye to eye. And then the coffee roasting, I'm actually sitting in Whole Foods signing a deal to put our coffee in Whole Foods.
Wow.
And at this, all that's happening business, but then all of our living parents, our 3 living parents, have been diagnosed with cancer within 6 months of all this happening.
No way.
So I got 2 little kids who really only knew me for the guy who drove them to daycare, and 3 parents with cancer, and 3 businesses, a wife with a career, and you're just but I'm all in with following God, and I'm just like, God, I don't know what to do with this. And it's funny, we were talking about Pastor Lane, who's from here in Colorado Springs. He was kind of a mentor friend. He and I are the same age, and I just said, hey, I just need to talk through some things I can't see the forest for the trees. And I told him that whole story there. I'd been in a small group, so he and I were friends, and he kind of helped me. And I just went home one day and I said, hey, wrote an email to one of my business partners, said, essentially, one way or the other, I buy your half, you buy my half. Either way, I'm out. Like, I was going to sell him the business and get out, or I was going to buy his half and let the team that I had run it, and I was going to take care of parents and kids and stuff. He ended up buying my half. The coffee roasting company, I ended up, signing the deal and then selling to my business partners. And I essentially just retired for 6 months, and then I was able to breathe. And okay, God, I see what you're doing in all this. And then the day I signed the last piece of paperwork, my wife's career took off. So I sell businesses, create margin, but then my wife gets a bump. And so like all the margin that we had built up was just went like this. And so there was zero pressure for me to go back to work immediately. I tried to create one thing, but God wasn't really in it. And so that kind of just hit the skids. And about 6 months into that, I get a call from our men's pastor, and he says, hey, I could really use some help. I hear you're good with strategy and moving things around and structuring things. I was like, well, I don't know, maybe not. And so I just showed up and became like his right-hand guy, just served at the church in men's ministry. And then the next thing, he said, hey, would you help our legacy team? My wife and I had always loved giving over and above. And so I helped structure the global piece of that, how we do that at church. And then I started helping how we do pastors with Pastor Lane, outside the U.S. And I just kind of did that for like it was about 3 years. I just served. There was no pressure to go. My wife and I had challenges in there where you're kind of like, hey, he's got the dream job. I'm like, hey, you got the dream job, because I was hanging out with my kids and really serving at the church. And she was really, went to her home office. She didn't have to travel, but she, had a great income and everything was great. But then there was still this piece that it wasn't right, and that's where God started really working on both she and I about ministry. I'll never forget one day I was in the church and I can't remember what I was doing, but God said, go help them. I'm like, go help them do what? Like, we're already
go
big.
Help them. Yeah, okay. I love how the Lord is always so clear. Like, go help them what?
Yeah. And the more I'm like, okay, I can see how I can help, but I still didn't know really fully what that meant. And so we just kept going. And I tell you what ended up happening is, we do 21 days of prayer and fasting, which that had been my revelation years ago. That was the first thing I did as I came to our church. I just, it's a funny story. I should have told it earlier, but I just jumped in one day. He said, we're going to do it. I'm like, okay. And I just, no prep, no nothing. I just stopped eating and started drinking water for 20 minutes. I ate a bagel a day just because I stood on my feet all day. I needed a little bit of energy, but that's all I did. So a bagel a day for 21 days.
A bagel fast.
Yeah, it was not the best, but like God, it was the cool thing was like God really revealed himself in that season. So I learned to use those seasons to hear from him.
Yeah, focus.
Yeah,
refocus.
And we could do a few of those, and then I felt like God was saying, hey, goat, like this may be what I need you to do. I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means. And then all in the background of all this, so my wife had grown up in Scotland when she was little, so for like 3 or 4 years while her dad was on assignment there. And we had been saving money since we got married to do that with our kids. And we didn't know what it was like. It was kind of like
to go live internationally.
Yeah, go live. We'll take 3 months, 6 months. We just wanted to go something. And so, I'm about 3 years into this. I tell my wife, hey, we got enough money. We can go, like, I've done the calculation. We can move somewhere in Europe and, Ireland, whatever it is. We didn't have a spot. And she said, okay, great. And then God, in one of those prayer seasons, was like, you can go, but you got to have a mission. And I'm like, God, come on. Like, wow. I can't just go live on the beach in France. And he's like, just a mission. So I'm back searching. I go back to Pastor Lane. I said, and long story short, we sit down and he's like, hey, I'm going to do this grow leader, grow is how we help churches in Europe. You can go, you pay your way and just put your feet on the ground, which if we're talking mission space, helping people get their feet on the ground, even if it's just for a short time, I think is one of the best things we can do for people who feel called to the nations. So he put me, I go with him. I'm there like 2 days. I'm like, this is it. This is it. This is where I'm supposed to be.
Wow.
Yeah. And I get home and I tell my wife, and that was in Germany, and she accused me of getting on Wikipedia and calling it the Tuscany of Germany because it was southern Germany. It was beautiful. And so long story short, we just make the prep. I asked her to take leave from her corporate job. And she took 6 months leave. And I said, well, we can be there for 3 months, just no visa required. And so I just up and picked up our whole family and we moved to this part of Germany where we had a handful of relationships. And we brought a college student with us, so we had a college student living with us.
Yes.
That's a whole another part of our story. And we just moved and we just started helping churches.
So you're just in Germany. You were just helping local churches
who were using our model.
Your church has a model.
It has a model of know God, find freedom, discover purpose, make a difference.
Right.
There's all those pieces you can. There's almost a manual you can use, but then there's a lot of things that are in your head and my head and any leader's head that puts the bricks together. I call it the mortar and the bricks.
Yeah.
And so I would just help them work through systems and structure and how do you put these things together. And God just, it was the best time, because nobody was paying me, nobody was, funding me. I wasn't raising support, and God was just opening doors. And so we were going to stay longer, but no, there wasn't a position anywhere that I found. And so we come back, and then I go get a job. My wife still has some sabbatical left. And while we were over there, you realize, you always operate under some sort of pressure work-wise.
Yeah.
We all have it. So we realized that once she was out from under the pressure, she was a different person. And
wow.
And I was like, I don't care how much money you make. She was making really good money. And I would rather have you with less pressure living your life to your fullest like this than have all the money in the world.
Wow.
And I just told her one day, I said, quit when you want to quit. Don't. She's like, I know I'm supposed to quit. And I said,
that wasn't scary at all?
Oh, it was terrifying.
Yeah.
Because then we go from I have a part-time job. She has a healthy income to zero.
Yeah, right.
Whenever she wanted to go to zero. But we'd already seen God work back in Germany financially. Yeah. We didn't pay for a place to live. The guy gave me his apartment, a 3-bedroom apartment in Germany. It was huge. God gave us his 5-bedroom house to live in.
Wow. So you had some context for the Lord's faithfulness.
Oh, 100%.
Just being obedient.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that gave us a lot of confidence to go, just quit. God will provide. And so I'm working. I'm still serving at the church, and she just calls me or I get home and she's like, hey, I quit. Oh, man, okay. And then it's real,
Yeah, right.
And I said, okay, let's just pray. And God, we just know you're faithful. We just sat I remember standing in our kitchen, we just prayed that, okay, God, you're going to move. And 7 days later, Pastor Hamp from our church calls to hire me to be the men's pastor. Essentially, that wasn't the exact role, but that's what it was.
Wow.
At our church. And 7 days later, new beginnings, all this stuff. And 3 days into that job, that job gets eliminated. We restructured the whole.
That's not ideal. Not ideal when you have a new job 3 days in. It's eliminated.
Which was I love the vision of it because that's why I love our pastor, because he's never he's always tinkering to make it better and get it better, and it was a little unnerving. Like, okay, I think I got hired to do that, and like that's not even a thing anymore, according to what I just heard. But then I'm like, I'm pumped because then I've got like a really clean slate for anything that's going to happen. And so that happened, and I ended up being a groups director at our biggest campus eventually. And then about a couple of years into that, I'd been on the legacy team. Like I'd said, I worked with Pastor Lee, who's our legacy pastor. He calls me one day. He says, "Hey, love for you to come help me." And I'm like, "Okay, let's do it." Like, I love it. Like, I love that space. I love business people. I love entrepreneurs. I love, giving. And so I get that call, and then maybe 2 hours after that, he's like, "Hey," he calls me back. He says, "Hey, Pastor Dino's going to call you. He needs help. He just lost a couple of people that he needs to replace. And so you're going to work for 75% for him and 25% for me." And that's evolved now where I'm almost 100% with Pastor Dino, but I work with the legacy team. So I do all global missions and the budget with Pastor Dino and help him oversee some things.
So one of the things that I'm just hearing in your story, I mean, you were so plugged in to this local church. I mean, from the time that I love this lady who comes into a cycling shop, just lit up on her church.
Yeah.
And that, you mentioned it just kind of subtly. It was meeting it sounds like in a
high school.
At a high school at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
What people might not understand, now listening to this, but I know,
Yeah.
is that now that church that started in a little tiny high school is now exploded in growth.
Right.
And so when you're talking about like shifting around in this church and your journey and being internationally, that little church has turned into one of the biggest churches in America, I believe.
Right.
Give some context for somebody listening to this church. Church of the Highlands is the church.
Yeah.
Give some kind of just some context, even for me.
Yeah.
So somebody can understand that part of your story, just how you were integral within this local congregation. That's really, really grown.
It's been like, God's in it, and I honor, Pastor Chris Hodges is our senior pastor, and he moves to Birmingham and just creates, part of me sometimes thinks it was just because like I was there, like I had grown up in church. All of a sudden he's introducing us to like, man, the God that I almost never knew, and, things like that. And so now we're, I think as of today, we're 25 locations.
Wow.
All across the state of Alabama, 2 in the state of Georgia, and then we're in 21 of Alabama's 24 prisons.
Wow.
Officially, and then we're in some other like correctional facilities that are like juvenile detention and things like that. So big scope,
Huge scope.
Yeah.
And connected, I would say, even to one of my, just in our conversations, it's a church that's connected as a part of a bigger, broader network of churches, even beyond.
Right.
It's kind of immediate context of Alabama and
Absolutely.
Georgia.
So the great thing that I've learned, I've also learned this from Pastor Chris, is when you create something, write it down.
Sure.
Like, hey, like this is a system that we put this together. So we were the Association of Related Churches, or ARC.
Right.
We were church plant number 1, and to this day, like ARC has planted over 1,100 churches over the last 20 years in America and around the world, which is amazing. So
that is crazy. So that's like part of this context. I think is really important, even in your story. Again, a church that starts in a gymnasium at a high school.
Yeah.
It's church plant number 1 of a bigger movement of churches. 1,100 of those.
Yeah.
The Church of the Highlands itself in Birmingham is now expanded to 25 different locations around and even into Georgia.
Right.
So it's a fact. I've been there, and every time I go there, I'm like, oh, this is the coolest church I've been. It's just a fast growing, it's exciting place, young people.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to be a part of it because it is always evolving. And again, like I love that about our pastor. He's tinkering to make it better, and the whole goal is to just reach more people. Like the whole goal is to reach people. Like it's very evangelistic, and he'll even say, hey, if like we're gonna go reach people all the time. So if like our focus is not the people who are sitting in here. We're gonna help take care of you. We're gonna do groups for you, but we're here to reach lost people. Which I honestly like. That's the piece I love. Like especially in the global space, because it's all about the lost in the global space. So like reaching the people who haven't heard. But hey, there's people, 2 blocks from where we're sitting right now who have probably never heard the name Jesus. And that's our goal as a local church, is to reach the people that have never heard. So.
One thing I love about that, just from my experience, like I said, I'm a fan of Church of the Highlands. I think sometimes that in the missions conversation, people go, there's kind of global missions, foreign missions, and it's easy to talk about unreached people groups and church planning and kind of exotic places.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think people forget about our own backyard. And I mean, even you're talking about being in prisons in Alabama.
Yeah.
We forget that there's groups of people in our neighborhoods that have never heard. I mean, you said never heard the name of Jesus. That's my experience.
Yeah.
In America, Colorado Springs, Colorado, there's people who are completely disconnected from the name of Jesus. And one thing I love about your church and kind of the whole movement of ARC is that you blend foreign missions and kind of local missions in a way that I think it's really important.
Oh, it is important. I think, and if you look at like the verse where from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth, it doesn't say you go here, then you go here, then you go. It's like all encompassing.
Right.
Like it's everywhere. And you have, as a local church, like you can have focuses and you can have focuses in seasons, but it's the whole verse. And you have to pay attention to the guy next door. Like, I mean, my wife, like, I didn't say that part. She had never heard the name Jesus growing up. I mean, she grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Like,
which is, I think, most people
it's
think
the
of
Bible,
Birmingham.
It's the Bible
Birmingham,
Belt.
Alabama.
Yeah,
it's like a fairly religious place.
I mean, she'll tell you, she's like, I never, like, even growing up, he's like, her parents were great people, I mean, her mom is, as she would say, fired up for Jesus now, but she did, like, my wife was like, I'd never been invited to church. I'd never been asked, like, so, like, she's one of them, and they're all around us. But you do all those spaces. You have to go. So nationally, we do ARC. We plant churches, and we're trying to reach people, and then grow. We discussed Grow and Grow Leader, who is how we resource other churches, and that's another piece of our missions. And it's and then we have a strategy for reaching the world. We have all those pieces, and we believe that's a healthy way to do it. And I tell people, like, I love people who love the 1040 window. Yeah, like I get it, but that, like, hey, that's not the only thing. And
it's right. It can't be the only.
It can't be the only thing. And so be fired up for the 1040. But there are people from the 1040 that live in your backyard. Yeah. Like I had a guy come, and he was from the Middle East, and we were sitting in this. It was a bigger room of people, and he said, somebody asked him how to evangelize Muslims, and he was very direct, and he said, hey, next time you go get gas, ask the guy behind the register what his name is. And he moved, and he just moved on. It didn't really answer the question, but he did. And so then it's still Q&A, and he comes back around. Somebody else asked kind of this. He's like, but how do you reach, how do you witness to Muslims? He said, okay, next time you go to the Circle K, it's a convenience store, ask the cashier what their name is. And then he moves on again. And I love this guy. Well, and it convicted me because, like, I started thinking about all the places I go, like, that are 2 minutes from my house. Whether they're, Muslim, whether they're Indian, that doesn't matter. Like, just all the people that you interact with on a daily basis that you don't know. Like, I had the lady at the dry cleaner. She knew my name. Hey, Tim, good to see you. Man. Finally, I just was like, "Hey, Haley, how, like, that." I'd learned what her name was, and so now we started having conversation. Can I, have I invited her to church? Yes. Has she come? No. But but the whole point is, like, the greatest witness you can be is, like, just knowing people and inviting them to be a part of your life. And it was a great way to kind of take the world from out here at the 1040 to, like, right here in your backyard. So
I think what you're saying is really profound. I mean, you're saying a lot of profound things, actually. I think what you just said, the greatest witness, oftentimes is just getting to know people, know them by name, ask them. I mean, get into their story, right. Just get in a little bit of life with them, and I think. That would be one thing I think is profound that you just said. But I think another thing that strikes me, and I think we've actually talked about this before maybe, I think sometimes in the missions folk, right? I mean, there's a type of people that they would self-identify as missions folk. I'm probably, we're doing a podcast on missions. Yeah. I must be a missions folk. Yeah. But I think sometimes there's a false dichotomy that whether it's intentional or it's unintentional, I don't think it really matters. But there's a group of people that are so excited about rural Nepal and the 1040 window.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that group of people maybe even looks down on U.S. kind of engagement, missional engagement. And then there's kind of the other side. I mean, there's the other side of that is and I don't even know if they usually identify as missions people. They just identify as, I'm invested in my local community. I mean, I don't really care about, wherever internationally.
Right.
But I think this is maybe a false dichotomy that you're addressing. Maybe speak a little bit more to that, because I know that you're passionate about that.
Yeah. Well, I think when having grown up with missions, I do have, I believe, a missions gift, but I think because of my background of business and some other things, I come at it at a little different angle of efficiency and strategy, and I've always felt like sometimes the high missions people who love the world, they get so wound up, and it's hard to handle them, and so you almost can I call it the missionary in the corner.
Yeah, right.
Well, because and when you start talk about local church and those people, there's been to me there was a pull apart where, man, the guy comes off the field, he was a great missionary to Nepal, now he's called back home, let him be the missions pastor, but he's just it's so hard. And it's hard for those people to exist because, man, they have been on the front lines, and that's what I honor is these people who go and
they've seen things, encountered things
100%, and now they come back, and it's hard for them to step into the local church world.
Yeah, to reintegrate.
Exactly, and so they just end up in the corner, doing their thing, and then it's hard for the rest of the church to mesh, and I'm like, how do we get everything together? And God, I believe God was like, you just need to make sure you're doing what your pastor wants to do. And it's pastors know God, find freedom, discover purpose, make a difference. Hey, how do I do that in the global space? And so now, how do you? Okay, and then can we dive even deeper? And so I'm honestly, it's a gift that he was. I think he'll even tell you he thought he was going to be a missionary to France.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that until a couple of years ago. But so our pastor is dialed into the globe, and he gave us clear vision on 4 things we want to do, and then he said, y'all go figure out with a team of people where to go do those things. And so we have 4 things, and we're not always just going to do those 4 things. We're not black and white, but the majority of them, and we and myself, we got a graph and a chart. And everything of what we're doing and where we're doing it, and then we just figure it out. And I think you have to help all those people. It takes a lot of more pastoring, I think, of people than a lot of missions guys really want to do sometimes, honestly. Because they're in our church, they're in your church, they're all over there. Man, let's go to 1040 window, front door.
Yeah.
That's where it is. Hey, okay, I get you. We're going to do that too. But there's also all these places along the way that we can help people, because our job is there's a discipleship journey that's kind of in the background that I think a lot of missions people forget.
Yeah.
That my journey from being a kid going to the mission field, I still had to be discipled along the way before I can even understand going to the ends of the earth. And
I think sometimes too that foreign missions can be. It can be easier to imagine. I would say this from my own experience. So I don't have to point any fingers. I don't have to. I can say from my experience, it's easier to imagine evangelizing or discipling some internationals in a faraway place in huts or whatever else, low income, third world. It's easy for me to imagine myself doing ministry there, and it feels really good.
Yeah.
It actually feels like I can make a big difference. Yeah. And then I stop and I think about my neighborhood in Colorado Springs, and it's that's hard. That's those are real people. Those are, and there's kind of a disconnect, or that for I think us, where missions can sometimes fall into. There's some subtle traps that I think happen for us. And I wonder, one thing I love about your church, I've seen it firsthand. Such a passion for Birmingham, for Alabama. And so you're helping disciple people to care about their actual communities.
Right.
How would you say, to maybe someone listening to this who's feels like a little bit like me, they're like, foreign missions sounds easy, but actually my neighborhood, terrifying. What would you speak maybe to them to help them on their journey of local mission?
I think I would go back to my own. I can just tell you a story about my own kind of process of like getting in a group, like a small group. Like that's a big thing for us as a church. Like we're a church of groups, not with groups. Like there's more people coming to groups than coming to church. So like I would like intentionally get around, like if you're a believer, the natural tendency, a lot of people is to like go to like what feeds me and what's my own discipleship and where's my journey, and like which very important. Yeah. But there's also all these other people who like they're not where you are. They're maybe a few steps behind, and I have to I deal with church people all the time. I have to make an intentional focus to actually get back into the world.
Right.
And I have this group of guys I ride bikes with, and when I started that group, there was probably 20 or 25 people. None of them knew they were in my small group. That's
awesome.
They were worldly people, which was great. But I would pray for them by name as we would be riding, and so that went on for years and years. And then the group ebbed and flowed, just life, and finally there's probably 3 or 4 of us that are believers in this group, and then probably 4 or 5, and I send it, myself or the other guy that leads it would send out a devotion once a week. It'd be very in a text, and then one day we're all riding like up in this, and one of the guys who wasn't a believer, he kind of drifts back to me, and like he kind of actually slows enough down to where I have to slow. So we're separating ourselves from the group.
Wow.
And he says, "Hey man, would you just pray for my family right now? Because like both of my parents have cancer, and like I just don't know what to do, and I've been praying, and so he's unloading his heart, and I'm like, I'd never heard this guy say anything else other than, hey, let's ride, or
give me my water bottle.
Like it's very like very just. I mean, it's just doing life with people. But he recognized the fact that like, hey, I need to connect to something else, and and I think that's how if I'm talking to people who don't know how to integrate into their world, like what are you already doing that you intersect with worldly people? Like, I mean, you have kids, I have kids. How often do you go to the ballpark?
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah, you're with people all of the time.
And usually a vast majority of them are not, believers or Christians, and it's not about like hitting them over the head with the gospel, but you do have to be a gospel representation, and that's in how you act and how you treat people, and I think that's where people think it's like I got to go, hand out tracts and
right,
and tell them my story and share the gospel. And
I think sometimes it's way easier than it's like we've made it so complex. I love reading sociology books. I just love it. It's just I'm kind of a nerd, and it just constantly. It's one in my Kindle that I'm reading, and one of the books that I read not so long ago was talked about something called the Dunbar Circle. And Dunbar Circle, essentially, it's a time-tested, academic-tested concept that we have about 150 relational spots. I mean, we have limited time, we have limited energy. We can't have thousands and thousands of relationships.
Right.
We know, I think it's like a couple thousand people by face. We know a couple thousand people by name, like 1,000 people by name. But we really give our time and energy to like 150 people. And there's different in this kind of breakdown. There's different levels of relationship. You give your top 5 relationships get the most of the bulk of your energy,
right,
et cetera. I think as I read that, I thought a lot about local Christians in the United States and how sometimes we fill up all of those 150, the limited slots, the relational slots, they're just filled with other Christians.
Yeah.
Or you know, I mean, because you got to remember, it's like your family is going to fill into that slot. Your pets
Right.
technically
Right.
fill. I mean, it's just kind of this crazy thing.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's as simple as keeping some slots, some relationship slots open for people that are not just like you, don't think just like you, that are not Christians. Just giving some life space to normal people. I think that step for the average Christian in America is just
100%.
is enormous. Like, just go out, know people's names, go ride your bike with them, go cheer for your kids. I mean, give some energy to that person who's cheering at your kid's soccer game with you. It's that simple.
Yeah, it is that simple, and I think that's what's hard. I mean, it was hard for like me and my wife to go, okay, like, because we're on this faith journey, so you naturally start to fill up those relationships with, okay, I want to know like more about the faith walk with these people.
Yeah.
But then you get to that, and then all of a sudden you look around and they're all the same type.
You realize you're talking to a bunch of people that are kind of homogenous.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I remember a few years ago I had to just make an intentional effort to go integrate back into
society.
Like hey, let's get around some people who don't think and believe like you do. Let's go know some people's names. Let's talk to these people. And honestly, I think my kids have helped a lot because they are around people who don't believe like we believe.
Yeah, right.
And it opens your eyes. My daughter had a friend who was Hindu, and they were really close. And then even integrating like some of our traditions and having her a part of those, and you start to I remember sitting in my basement just going, man, like those people are like, they live right down the street,
right?
And they just don't know, and they're not in India anymore,
right?
They're here, and
right?
So just like that was all eye openers for me to like, man, Tim, get yourself back plugged into the world, like,
right?
And don't be of it, just be in it, you
right.
know.
Well, I think, I believe in prayer. I believe in prayer for things like revival.
Yeah.
I mean, I have no problem sitting in a prayer room or beating on a guitar and crying out for revival. But sometimes I wonder, guys, we just got to go get in the game. Revival is not that hard. My experience in the world is that if we create time and space, just like Jesus did, because Jesus was always giving attention to, I mean, he filled up his relationship spots. He was always filling them with the brokenhearted and the destitute and people who were kind of distant in society. If we just were to do that, my experience is that people are hungry. I mean, it's not that people are. I think we have this perception that like the world out there is so resistant to the gospel. American church, America is just kind of going downhill, and maybe it is in some ways, but it's going downhill. My experience is actually, no, people are actually in need of hope.
Yeah.
I mean, they have parents with cancer, they have that are sick, and they're looking for someone who can give them authentic love and authentic hope.
Right.
And we can be that, again, if we just create some space and time.
100%. And you have to do it like I think at the more as a believer or at a church worker or like you really have to like you have to segment off some time to do it.
Yeah,
because,
right.
I mean you're super busy. I'm busy. Like everybody's busy.
Right.
But you have to go, okay, like how do I get around people who are like who would Jesus be around?
Yeah, right.
Well, he probably wouldn't be around. He would be hanging out with these guys, but he's going to go spend time with these guys too. So you just have to make sure you have space, and even if you have to create like events for your own family, I mean, I think if you start to back up a little bit, we're getting into holiday season. You start to go, hey, we could go serve food at Thanksgiving. We could a lot of people would say, oh, well, you're just trying to fill a need. Well, yeah, maybe, but like that could also be a catalyst to another event. And this example, my wife called me one day. She's like, hey, I want to go to this serve project. She's like, she just had this need to do what we were talking about. How do we go serve our community? She's calling me, asking me all the questions because I integrate with that some. And I said, go, just like go do it. And went down there 3 or 4 weeks in a row to like get that, man, there are people who need food and mostly need Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's the way to get, and it helped her connect back to, okay, wow, there's a massive hurting world. And this is one project out of hundreds that, we could have been a part of. But it was that whole catalyst of how do you step into this season? How do you step into like the world, so to speak? And it was super impactful. I mean, she took me 1 week, and she
awesome.
took my son 1 week, and it's just, I think more people have to be intentional about how they live their life.
Right.
I
think what's crazy too. I mean, I'm a CEO of a global evangelism organization, and the irony of that could be that I use all of my time and energy for something I think that the Lord loves.
Yes,
I think the Lord
sure.
loves what I do.
Yeah.
But I can so easily see how time gets away from you, energy. I mean, I'm doing ministry, but like almost one of the barriers, like in my life, I'm just being honest and transparent, is one of the barriers to actually impacting my world or going to the world is actually ministry.
For sure.
Ironically. And so it's like, I think what you said is, it's just so profound. I just want to keep driving that in, that you have to create intentional space to get to reintegrate into society.
Yes.
And bringing hope is not that hard if we're doing that.
Well, I mean, I'm giving a ton of credit to Pastor Dina, because he's a people person and I work for him, and he is all about that. Like I've walked with him in lobbies and other churches, and he loves to go feel. He's kind of a feeler. He loves to feel here's a guy walking in one of our campuses or into a church that we're in. Yeah. What does this feel like?
Yeah.
And so he's helped me actually turn that on in my own personal life, because that's just the way he operates. I don't really operate like that at all. Yeah. But he's like, hey, how does this? I've walked through our lobbies at our church campus. He's like, man, this doesn't feel real good. If I'm a single mom and I got my 2 kids in tow, this environment isn't, how do we warm this up? And we have an amazing environment, but he's like, how do we make it better? How does this impact the person that's been out all night and just decides to show up at church on Sunday morning? And so I think I give him a ton of credit for helping me just with that part of my life, because again, I'm thinking of is there coffee in the canister? I'm thinking all the logistics, like that banner's crooked. That's just the way I see the world. But he sees it through people.
But I think that's that's awesome. I mean, I didn't know that about Pastor Dino. I think that's really awesome, because what I think that we forget, again, because sometimes because we're insulated, we do forget that what's the experience of somebody in my neighborhood of Christianity or of the church. And I don't think I think it's not that hard if you just stop and slow down. And it's like, oh, we come across X, or this is a little bit weird. For a while I was saying here around our office, I said, we got to make evangelism less weird. Quit being weird. Because I think that's the problem. I think we're so convinced of our conviction. I think that's great. But we forget, hey, this other person, they're not going to your church right now, and they're living their life. They're trying to take care of their kids, feed their family, and then we show up and we're a 10 out of 10 on zeal and conviction. Yeah. And we gotta, I think, meet people a little bit more where they're at. Yeah. And try to see it from their perspective a little bit more.
You got to be a 10 out of 10 on connection. I think that's the place where you have to go, okay, am I adding value to this interact? Ask a lot of questions, because that's what do people most want to talk about? They want to talk about themselves. Yeah. What do we want to talk about? I want to talk about myself.
Yeah. I mean, I have a podcast, so I'm more than happy to talk about myself.
Right. And so, how do we jump in and go, and how do we ask great questions to people? Yeah. And so I love when people walk away and they know nothing about me and I know everything about them. Because then I think you hopefully add value. And I'm not great at it. I'm not a great question asker. But if you kind of think about it, what does that person need? They just need to, my wife is the best encourager on the planet. If you and I were sitting here with her, we'd be like, well, we could take on the whole world, just us two, and she would be like, yeah, y'all can do it. But I've learned that from her. Great. How do you just help people feel a little bit better about themselves, especially if they got their 2 kids? I mean, I mean, how many families are running around us that are just, you just don't know.
You've seen the statistics. I think that they're kind of throughout all of church history, but they're true today, that Christianity has grown and has continually grown, oftentimes through women, through the women's movements around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, there's more Christian women around the planet than there are men. And I'm not even saying this to be funny. I think it's because they connect better.
Yeah.
I think it's because they're just a lot more relational than knuckleheads like us.
Oh, 100%.
They ask the questions. I think it's beautiful, and I think probably the men's side of the global church could learn a lot from the way that women connect into community and connect with people and meet people where they're at.
Yeah, I think when I started out doing men's stuff, the whole idea was, man, we had to, like, I can't talk to these guys about anything. I need to give them something to do.
Right.
Let them connect over. Hey, can y'all build this deck for this lady?
Yeah, fix the banner up there.
Fix the banner. Like, I'll do all the things, and then they end up connecting because men connect indirectly. They don't like where women connect directly.
Man, that's so true.
And so how do we get more guys to just connect to the local? And that's where I love the mission space, because outreach and missions, like to me, it helps guys integrate really easily, because
it's true.
They want something to do. Most men, they're like, hey, like, let me build something. Let me go move something. Let me go, let me go do something. And I think that helps. Now, like, we have guys building decks. We have guys, doing landscaping. We have all the stuff. But it's the best way for men to connect. And
it's so true. I never did that math before. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, if more people would figure that out, like, I mean, you don't have to talk about Jesus. Like, in my group, I mean, we would pray, depending on the group. Like, we would pray sometimes before we rode. Most of the days it was just praying, like, about the guys, because I'm like, man, these guys would not come if they understood this was like a small group that was
right. They would be like, that's weird.
That's
I'm
weird.
out.
Right. You're the weird guy, So how do we
guys.
Right. And then they automatically have some perception. And the whole thing is, if you change the perception on the front end, they're more accepting on the back end.
Right.
And so, again, the indirect connection for guys is critical for people. So especially mission space helps that and work that out.
I could talk to you for hours about global missions and local missions, but one of the questions I ask on every one of these podcasts, so it's kind of my finishing question. It has to do some terminology that I'm connected to this terminology. I love it. I've said this probably 20 times now on this podcast, but it came from actually reading an article about Mother Teresa, and it talked about her mission, Mother Teresa's mission. It was to carry Christ to the destitute. That's my paraphrase, but the words that jumped out to me when I read that was carry Christ. And I love that. I think the imagery of that. I love the incarnational aspect of carrying Christ.
Yeah.
But I ask every one of our guests at the end, when I say the words carry Christ, what does that mean to you?
Wow. So,
I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh, no, I love it, because I think we all have to re-examine our life on a periodic basis, especially when you're in ministry, because it goes back to, when I step into the world, does the world know that I'm carrying Christ? Like that. Right. I think that's the first thing that, when you said that, that's what comes to my mind, was like, wow, when I stepped onto an airplane today, was I kind? Was I nice? Was I compassionate? When something happens, that's, to me, that's what it means to carry Christ. Is, would people know that I'm different just by the way I'm carrying myself? Is my car excellent? Like, there's all these pieces like that go into that. Like, am I dressed nice? Am I that's immediately where I start to go. And then again, because I'm wired a certain way to notice, where things are, and like, I have to, like, my kids and my wife always make fun of me. Hey, pastor your face. Like, I know you're happy on the inside, but the outside is
Did you say pastor your face?
pastor your face. Yeah.
I like that, pastor your face.
Well, I mean, because like my resting face is not great, and I know that.
Pastor your face.
Well, it went to another level when I worked at one of the campuses. The receptionist had noticed this in myself, and she had a sign that was calligraphy. And it was on a, about an 8x10. It was on a card, and it was drawn super nice. And it said, "If you're happy and you know it, tell your face." And if I was just like walking through the office,
for the record, I think your resting face is just fine. I mean, there's no judgment on the Redeeming Missions podcast about Tim Hurd's face.
My son's with me today, so he can attest. Like, man, my resting face is really not good. But so she would flash the card for me, so like, especially if I'm like, because I'm walking, I'm thinking, and when I'm thinking, my face like it just goes the wrong way. And so anyway, that again to carry like, do I look like I'm having a good time? My wife would, I like to tell stories, and I'll never forget, all my family and my friends, man, just the way your face, it just doesn't look really. We're at this, my daughter and I were at this thing, and it was like a street ministry thing, or something was happening in front of us, and she's about 4 feet in front of me, and I'll look over her, and she's got her foot, we're standing, she's got her foot kicked out in front of her, and she got her arms crossed, and she's got her face like kind of, almost like, looking at it like with judging it a little bit. I was like, man, that is just not a good look.
Right.
Well, immediately I'm standing the same way she's standing. I got my arms crossed. I got my foot like, and I realized like it's like a mirror image. I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm not carrying Christ really well right now as I sit here and watch my daughter, look at this, and I'm doing the same thing. So I really think that's what it means to carry Christ. Are you compassionate when people run into you? Do they know you're different, and you don't have to say anything religious, or can I be praying for you, or you don't
have to be weird.
No, right. Go back to our weird. You don't have to be weird. You just have to be nice to people and genuine. I think that's the other thing, is because people know when you're genuine and when it's not. So
that makes me. I'm going to laugh about that all day. Pastor your face.
Pastor your face.
But I love the intentionality of what you're saying. I mean, to carry Christ requires a degree of intentionality. I mean, it's a degree of even self-awareness.
Yeah.
That I think you're saying so well.
Well, the self-awareness piece, like I'm the. I could go down the rabbit hole on self-awareness. I think that's the one thing that people don't do well.
Yeah.
Just is to accept the way you're wired.
Right.
I get it. I'm wired this way, but I can't just be wired this way and all the ways and just neglect all the things that aren't great. I'm not going to be a 10 with a resting face. I get that. But I could be a 5. Up from a 2,
Right.
So you do have to and I love to all the Enneagram things. I love to, understand why do I do that? Oh, that's why I do that. Or that's why I'm like that. And I love the self-discovery of just even my own self. And now how do I change for the better? And how does that make me more Christ-like? And
man, it seems like a good carrying Christ in a healthy way requires some self-awareness, as simple as that.
Absolutely.
I mean, we're like breaking down, I think, in a lot of ways. Evangelism, it's like, 1, give people time and attention. 2, pastor your face.
Yeah, right.
I mean, this would go so far in our world.
Right. I mean, even saying thank you to people. I being out here for the last few days, I thought the South people were nice. The people here have been incredibly.
Colorado?
Yeah.
Way to go, great state of Colorado.
Yeah, I was
proud of that.
I mean, I've been to the same coffee shop 3 days in a row, and every time I've gone in there, people are very personal. They're very nice.
Yeah.
And everywhere we've been, it's been, when you leave the South, people you kind of expect something different because the South is overly nice.
Yeah.
But I think even some of that speaks to am I being as nice back to these people as they're being nice to me?
Yeah.
And what does that say about my own personal witness to who God is in my own life? And so the self-awareness piece is we could all be a little more self-aware.
We're a couple guys, so I feel the we just need better EQ.
Yeah.
if someone wanted, who's listening to this, and you're talking about your church, Church of Highlands, and they wanted to just either learn more information about it and get connected, is there a way that they could do so? Is there a website they could go to?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to churchofthehighlands.com. That's our overall website.
Yeah.
We're also attached to a college, which has just been accredited, so it's highlandscollege.edu. That's,
which I would put in a plug for that.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
a sweet school.
You've come and taught a little bit with the students, which has been amazing. Arcchurches.com is another place to plug in.
We'll put all of this, too, in the show notes.
So that'd be great. And then if you want to know more about the systems and structure, so if you're a church and you're listening or watching, you can go to our Highlands resources places. That's where you get we give all that away for free. I don't think we really touched on that, but there are about 17,000 churches who are learning from us, and we do that all for free. And then, of course, Grow Leader is kind of Pastor Chris and how he engages with leaders around the world. But
that's awesome.
So all those things are available.
So we'll put all of that in the show notes and
that's awesome.
And resource people. So.
Cool.
Thank you for the conversation. Thanks for
loved it.
your honesty, your stories, your life.
Yeah.
Sharing that with us
appreciate
today.
you guys. All you're doing it's fun to kind of be in the same vein and just thinking about the world and our own personal lives together. Yeah. It's fun.
Thank you for joining us today on the Redeeming Missions podcast. If you like what you heard, we encourage you to visit everyhome.org/redeemingmissions to find all past episodes and learn more about Every Home and joining the efforts to carry Christ to everyone, everywhere, in every generation. Echoing in the prayer of St. Patrick, Christ with us, Christ before us, Christ behind us, Christ in us. Let us carry Christ to our world. Until next time.